Welcome. Let me start by introducing myself. Yat She Taisha Woodnishia, Twotsone Nishle, the Bethlehem Bashishtin, Dathni Dashiche, Hashgana Zohni Dashanella, Segaho Zande Nasha. My name is Taisha Wood. I am a member of the Navajo Nation. My background is in law enforcement. For 17 years, I was a police officer and detective within the state of Arizona. As a detective, my primary areas of work were with the sex crimes and crimes against children. I also do work with the Human Trafficking Capacity Building Center. For short, we will call it the Center. The Center is a coaching and development hub assisting organizations and tribes to grow their anti-trafficking work. Today's Talking Circle is sponsored by the Center. This webinar brings together skilled practitioners and participants, such as yourself, to discuss topics related to human trafficking. You can find videos and summaries, and summary documents of other Talking Circle webinars, which we've done in the past on the Center's website. In a few weeks, you will receive a link to the Talking Circle conversation and handouts, including Q&A summary of the discussions. As I mentioned, our format today is a panel discussion followed by Q&A with you. We will be discussing how to start a human trafficking conversation in a tribal community. This is a very sensitive and important topic that we all need to start considering. As you know, human trafficking is a difficult and sensitive topic. If you need support or just to talk to somebody about what you're hearing, please contact Strong Hearts Native Hotline. Strong Hearts Native Hotline is a culturally appropriate and anonymous helpline for Native Americans impacted by domestic, dating, and sexual violence. Their contact information is available on your screen. You'll see it now, and we will post their number in the chat for you to reference during the discussion. Again, it's on the screen, and we were going to put it in the chat box for you. Today, as we talked about human trafficking, I encourage you to take time for your own well-being and use any cultural items to support you in this discussion. This is a very important topic, but it is also a very sensitive topic for some people. So please use those resources and those powers and strengths that you have right now within your reach to take you through this conversation. This topic requires meaningful attention by all who do this work, including those of you today. Let us take a moment to center ourselves through prayer. My friend John Ross, a traditional healer at the Alaska Native Justice Center, will offer an opening prayer.
Thank you, Taisha. And I want to thank also Kayla from the Alaska Native Justice Center and Tracy for inviting me to do a prayer with you guys today. John Ross She'iji. My name is John Ross. Inushin Denainak She'iji Khdilan. I'm Takatnu Dene, Denina Athabaskan from Kenai, Alaska. And I want to do a bit of a land acknowledgement. Here where I live around Takatnu, it's in English called the Cook Inlet, and we are Takatnu Tana, the Cook Inlet Denina people. And also want to recognize very close by where I live here in Chugiak, Idluhet Keach Tana, the Klutna tribe. Denina Ethlin Guinea D, this is Denina land. Denainak Ethlinak Yeshtu Chukok Hushnu. I live and work on the land of the Denina. Before I say the prayer, I wanted to pass on a few words of wisdom from one of our traditional healers from Alaska who just passed away. She was pretty famous and known all over the world as one of the 13 grandmothers and a traditional healer and tribal doctor. Her name was Rita Blumenstein. And one of the things that she would say was, my Yupik name is, and I might not be able to say this exactly correctly, but Pamiovan, which means tail end, clearing the pathway to the light. She would say, I'm a very special person. There are no better thans or less thans me. She would also say, the past is not a burden. It is a scaffold which brought us to this day. We are free to be who we are, to create our own life out of our past and out of our present. We are all healers. When we heal ourselves, we also heal our ancestors, our grandfathers, our grandmothers, and our children. When we heal ourselves, we also heal Mother Earth. The prayer that I'm going to say is called Nahanua Duchidakani, which translates as our work prayer, and it's acknowledgement of our heavenly parents and our ancestors, and a request for blessing on whatever the work that we're doing today. Chinan Nakaltani Yali Jani Na Akilanda Yalach Kona Yatar. Thank you for this day. It's a good day. Bichadach Nelnash Nakaltani. We pray to you, Nakaltani. Chakainak in Chetni Natukta. We say thank you, our Father. Shukunalaka Tchofainstach. You gave us everything. Yari Kilan Eslen Bu. Chinan Eslen Bunkta Chidalkadi Nishtu. Thank you, Earth Mother, for our provisions. Na Esnena Duchidali. We respect our homeland. E uch Katsadalti. We live upon the outdoors. Chinan Yuyonk Na Desnaka. Thank you, our heavenly parents. Natsitsat na Nuchelnash. We remember our ancestors. Nacheateina da Achakalkudash. Our ancestors who are still walking with us. Huri Jengu Nanuni Dutuch. Help us today. Kutuush Nakada Rainyus Inesen. We want to go the right direction. Nakolje Chukeru Nugadashi Na Akilanda. We have the light and we know the way. We have a compass to guide us. Yari Nahanua Chukuyalach Katula Sadi. Yari Nahanua Chukuyalach Katula Sadi. Yari Hanu Chukuyalach Sadi. And may whatever work that we're doing today be blessed, and have a good meeting. Hocha. Thank you for letting me be part of your meeting opening, and I pray that you'll have a great meeting, and I'm going to sign off. So,
Thank you, John, for your good medicine. May you be safe in your day.
Thank you.
Well, folks, I said it earlier, it's a good day for a talking circle, right? It's a wonderful day. Let's meet our panelists. I have three beautiful ladies I'd like you to meet. Bonnie, let's start with you for introductions. Oh, Bonnie's still, let's go with Kayla.
Hello,
Kayla, let's
I'm
start
here.
with introductions. Okay, Bonnie.
Sorry, it was
Keep
just
me on
not
my toes today. Let's go.
cooperating. I'm sorry.
That's okay, Bonnie. That's okay. It's my fault. Well, let's start with you,
My name is
Bonnie.
Bonnie Clairmont. My Indian name is Rajadenga. I am a citizen of the Ho-Chunk Nation. I live in St. Paul, Minnesota, where I work for the Tribal Law Policy Institute as the Victim Advocacy Program Specialist. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you, Bonnie, for being here today. Kayla, will you go next, please?
Yes, my name is Kayla Cox. I'm a advocate case manager in Anchorage, Alaska for Native Justice Center. I'm Koyukon Athabasket, Tlingit, and then British and Scandinavian. I've been working in the field for over 3 years. I specialize in sexual assault and human trafficking, and also provide services for domestic violence as well.
Kayla, we are so happy to have you here with us today. Denise, on to you.
Bonjour, good day, everybody. My name is Denise Johnson, and I'm from the Lokudere band of Ojibwe. My name is Nenu Kase and Ikwe, which means hummingbird woman, and I work with American Indian Against Abuse, the Tribal Coalition for Wisconsin. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. We're very happy to have you here as well to join us. Today's Talking Circle topic is starting a human trafficking conversation in a tribal community. Education and awareness are vital in preventing and intervening in human trafficking. While starting the initial discussion about human trafficking can be challenging, we must also think about supporting the victims in this discussion. Today, we will discuss tribal-specific human trafficking resources, the strengths of our cultures as a means of healing and prevention, and tips for successful outreach. I also want to mention the Human Trafficking Capacity Building Center offers free assistance to tribes wanting to start, sustain, and grow their anti-trafficking work. This coaching assistance includes helping tribes connect to non-competitive federal funding through the Tribal Victim Service Set-Aside Program, or TVSSA. TVSSA funding is administered by the Office for Victims of Crime and can be used for cultural healing services for victims of crimes. It's a non-competitive application process. I encourage you to reach out to the center. Our phone number and email is in the chat to learn more about how we can assist you in our efforts to serve victims of crime, including victims of human trafficking. Please submit a question at any time during the webinar through the Q&A feature on your screen. Are you ready? Okay, let's begin with some of my questions for the panelists. Denise, my friend, we're going to start with you. How does a tribal program get started in addressing human trafficking?
Tribal program can learn through education within their programs from trainings like this and others, 101s. That's the main strength for a program. They can talk with family and friends, which I do often. I talk with my kids, and some people can go into the schools and talk to the schools. Knowledge is power. Partnering with your local agencies and stakeholders are really key, and having the same discussions with them. And networking is big. Network with everybody you can around DV, sexual assault, human trafficking. Those are some of the key aspects of getting your program up and running for human trafficking programming.
Thank you, Denise. You provided some really strong points. Does anybody want to add to that? Okay, Bonnie, this next question is going to you. When providing human trafficking resources in Indian country, what things are important to consider? Also, do you know of any specific resources for American Indian and Alaska Natives?
Yes, thanks, Taisha. Well, I just have to say that as Indian people, we never had words for human trafficking in our tribal languages, because I believe, there wasn't such a thing as sexual exploitation or trafficking prior to colonization. But because of the long history of cultural oppression and historic trauma, this has contributed to the culture of silence that we see in a lot of tribal communities today, where it's really difficult to talk about this among all different age groups. So the message that I always bring to tribal communities is we need to talk about this. We need to look after one another, which is part of our cultural traditions, is to take care of one another and to spread awareness so that we can increase vigilance in our communities by using all different forms of media, from social media, print material like newsletters, tribal newsletters, posters, fact sheets, however you could get information out there, really to, deluge your community. Also, perhaps tribal radio stations, educating teachers, school resource officers, people who respond to domestic violence and so forth. But we can't just hand out information, right? We have to talk. We have to visit about this problem in all aspects of our community so that we can create a climate where people feel comfortable about talking about such things, because there's this kind of shroud of secrecy around it. But I also have to say that, a lot of the material out there is sort of more mainstream, and it really does need to be more culturally appropriate. So materials should be developed by tribal communities themselves, especially with input from survivors, because it has to take into account geography, population, jurisdictional challenges, the language even, because not all people are bilingual. Even part of the history, culture, resources that exist in the community are all going to be different. So, all these resources really have to be tribally specific. Several years ago, we developed a website, and a lot of these resources will be in your chat box, but we developed one. It's www.tribaltrafficking.org, and it's filled with resources. So I really encourage you to visit the website. For example, there's links to a report on prostitution and trafficking of Native women here in Minnesota. It's called the Garden of Truth report. And also there's a curriculum that we developed that primarily for advocates who can train other advocates on trafficking, but it also can be used to train just about anyone. It has really a lot of good foundational information on trafficking.
Thank you, Bonnie. All very good and resourceful information. Side note, I took that advocates course, so thank you for reaching out to people that aren't advocates but work in that sector of human trafficking. Kayla, my last question is for you. It's impossible to do this work alone. So who in the community, what partners specifically, need to be included in a conversation about human trafficking?
Thank you, Taisha. You are absolutely correct. There is no way for one entity, one agency, one person to tackle the issue at hand that is actively happening. So when I think of who in the community needs to be involved, my first thought is always survivors and victims. Their voices are going to be the most important that we are utilizing and integrating into our practices, our services, our models. Really anybody can be involved as long as they have good comprehension and concepts of what human trafficking is, as well as understanding the comprehension of believing survivors and what that means. So there's a lot of trauma-informed care that goes into that. Survivor-led programming, and that's going to be along the lines of program, policy, intervention, or a product that's designed, implemented, or evaluated with intentional partnership, collaboration, and input from survivors to ensure the program and product accurately represents the needs, interests, and perceptions. It's easy for us sometimes on the outside who have not experienced it to go, oh, well, this seems like it's working, we should just do it this way. But if we don't have any survivors who have stake in the things that we're doing, we may not be being as effective as we think we are. So it is vitally important that we are including them in our conversations and allowing to empower them through leading these types of programs as well. Professional agencies for being included in these partnerships, which would be like a task force or multidisciplinary team, is going to be things like law enforcement, the FBI, organizations that offer funding to help support human trafficking survivors, whether that be like housing or clothing, security, shelters. Victim advocates are very important to help guide and offer resources through the process. And then being trauma informed on what human trafficking is going to be super important, that we understand the trauma, we are communicating in ways that are going to be effective and not shutting down our survivors who are trying to actively help work in cases and help us build programs that will benefit the community better.
Thank you, Kayla. So again, some very good information about community and the importance of community stakeholders, but we can't forget the victim's voice in all of this. So again, it's very important that we have the patience and we actually listen to the survivor's voice when we consider programs and resources. Well, it's time to move into our Q&A portion to answer your questions. Enough about my questions, let's listen to you guys. Please continue to submit questions into the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. We will get to as many questions as we can during our time together. If there's a question that we cannot address right now live, we will get to that question and answer it, and it will be included in the Q&A summary document. All registrants, all of those of you that are participating and registered, you will receive a copy of the recording and summary documents following the session. Okay, do not be shy. Let's look at some questions here.
Taisha, this is Bonnie. I thought I saw one about how can non-native programs or non-native people partner with tribal communities to, elevate this problem, bring greater awareness and so forth. There's just any number of ways. If some of your responders in your communities are invited, or if you're invited to participate maybe in a task force or in a working group, I really think it's important to come together and collaborate, because you may have resources that your local tribal community doesn't. You may have information, you may have a lot of helpful information and tools that can help the tribal community, as well as the culturally appropriate information can be provided to your programs as well. So I think those partnerships are really important, whether they're formalized or just being able to have coffee and talk about what's happening and what you're seeing in the surrounding area of the tribal jurisdiction.
Thank you for helping me with that, Bonnie. It's a very good question. Thank you for answering. I do have someone raising their hand and I see a question. Okay, folks, let's listen to this question on the panel. What is the difference in advocacy and human trafficking advocacy? Who'd like to take that?
I feel like I can answer that.
Thanks, Kayla.
As an advocate on a daily basis, I do and have worked with both sexual assault, human trafficking, domestic violence. So a lot of advocacy is going to be overlapping in the types of services. Our main goal here is to offer the support, make sure that we're offering resources and we're not telling people what to do. We really want people to be open to making their own choices with all the resources and tools that we're able to provide, because I can't tell somebody what the best path of their healing is. And then when we get into the difference between human trafficking advocacy and some other advocacy that I may do, human trafficking is a lot more complex when it comes down to working with survivors or victims, and even just terminology such as using survivors or victims. We don't get to dictate nor choose what place the participant may be in on whether we're referring them to a survivor or a victim. It is a very long and not linear process a lot of times to get out of the human trafficking life and mentality. And that's when you kind of go from being or identifying as a victim into a survivor. And that can take years. So it is definitely, I'm so sorry, my cat wants to hang out. Bad timing. But yeah, it's a lot more intensive, I would say. Not that it's not manageable or not that they are like have more needs. It's just a very, very complex issue that requires more wraparound services, more braided services. What can we do in the community? Who else can we take in? Because sometimes, you know, we have the FBI involved and there's so many agencies involved that we really need to make sure that we're siloing it down to make it as easy and manageable for them, because it can be so overwhelming to have to go through all these different things, that as an advocate, being that conduit to kind of keep things nice and narrow and pick and choose without overwhelming. So I would say the intensity is probably a big difference. Every advocacy case is intense, so don't think I'm like negating anything, but there's a lot more that goes into the process.
Thank you, Kayla. We understand that. And through that process, as an advocate in either discipline, it's important to remember self-care, right? Okay. I have a question here from Dawn. Hi, Dawn. Thanks for your time. Dawn is asking, how easy is it to start up a sex trafficking program from the ground up? Again, how easy is it to start up a sex trafficking program from the ground up? Anybody unpack? Let's go to Bonnie. Are you able to help us with that?
I think it's not any more difficult than it is to start up any other kind of advocacy program. You know, as Indian people, we're really resilient as far as how we utilize resources, and really creative, innovative. We know how to get people together, right? So, and that's what it takes, is really reaching out for support with your tribal leadership, with elders, with service providers. And I think half of it is really convincing and educating the community that this is a real problem, right? Because there's still a lot of myths around this problem, like it only happens in big cities, or it only happens on, you know, on the borders, or so. I think dispelling some of that and really creating some awareness about the need in your community is a good step in starting any kind of a program. It's the same way that domestic violence, sexual assault programs started, where people didn't really believe there was a problem. And there's still communities that think that there's, oh, sex trafficking doesn't happen in our community, you know, and yet it's like the same way with sexual assault. They say, well, we only had 2 cases last year. Well, now those are reported cases, or cases that have been disclosed, and yet there could be so many more that, you know, because of the sort of the cultural silence, people aren't coming forward, or because of their lack of trust. So the more awareness and the more community readiness, the better. And that takes just talking to one another and gaining support for a program, and then looking at what are the resources in order to start a program. And there's lots of good resources that are coming down, whether it's for funding or even in-kind resources.
Thank you, Bonnie. We have a question here regarding culturally appropriate ways. Denise, with your background in the work that you do with American Indians Against Abuse, I'm going to send this question to you. I feel that there's some parallel resources there. Denise, what are some culturally appropriate ways to evaluate tribal human trafficking programs? Again, what are some culturally appropriate ways to evaluate tribal human trafficking programs?
That's a really good question. I think a lot of the programs have some sort of cultural sensitivity and cultural aspects that can assist with a survivor and a victim in their process of healing and going in the direction they want to do. Of course, it's going to be different from tribe to tribe and nation to nation, and program to program what they offer. A lot of times they will have options of spiritual leaders that people can go talk to, or even ceremonies that can happen to assist a person with their healing process. And a lot of times the healing process is what can set off a person's way to be resilient and to overcome the issues that they feel they need to overcome.
Thank you, Bonnie, for your response. Kayla or Bonnie, would you like to add to that? Yeah, that's a really good question.
I don't know that I'm a good person to talk about evaluations. that's a whole sort of animal in and of itself. I think that, my feeling on evaluation is that, you also have to have resources. There's evaluators, then there's evaluators, right? I really think there's evaluators out there that really understand about what it is they're evaluating, for one thing, right? Because the work that we do in tribal communities can be so different, given the resources, given how limited the resources are even. So how our programs operate in tribal communities with all the jurisdictional challenges and the lack of resources and, startup, monies and programs look a whole heck of a lot different than what they do in mainstream or in urban areas, right? So I think it's important that you get people that are familiar with tribal programs and being able to evaluate based on the uniqueness of each tribe and their locations and so forth.
Thank you, Bonnie. I have a question I'm going to read to you. It's from my friend Kevin. Kevin is saying, I have heard on more than a couple occasions that it might not always be a good idea for men to work with female victims and survivors. He asks, how can or to what extent can men and or male advocates assist with victims and survivors? Kayla, how about you?
I can touch on that a little bit, and it definitely is a sticky situation, I would say.
It's a good question. Yeah.
Yeah, that is a really good question. Oftentimes, I will not say every single time because it's not true. Men are the ones who are trafficking. Of course, women can traffic as well. But if you are coming from having a male trafficker, it can be extremely hard for you to want to connect and have that relationship with another man. It can be very counterproductive. The thing about that, though, is having men on the team isn't a bad thing. Having men be part of these programs is not a bad thing, but I think it does come with the territory to kind of vet them and let them know, we may be assigning you this person, and this has happened within our agency, and they say, I don't want to work with a man, and it's never anything personal against that specific advocate. It's just something that's going to happen. So if somebody ever comes and says they're uncomfortable, they don't want to work with a man, we're not going to force them to work with somebody that they're uncomfortable with. So making sure that we're being open about that, and then also being able to maybe offer some training on that portion as well, to kind of vet our male staff that this may happen. It has nothing to do with you personally or anything along those lines. And, we are more than happy to train on how to do it. We're all getting the same training pretty much is what I'm saying, but it can be a preconceived bias. And I think that is just how it is. And I think it's completely fair for people to feel that way. So we will never invalidate or negate or say, no, that's too bad, this is who you're working with. So I think it's important to have everybody in the community, again, involved in these conversations. And the more maybe we're offering that education to men in the community, the more that they will be aware of stuff like this as well. Because again, not always, but often women are the victims. So offering that gender-based education is also really important.
Yes, thank you, Kayla. Again, it's one, a community involvement, but also the survivor's voice that we need to respect. Kevin, a very good question. I could see that we were all really thinking about that. It's definitely something we're all probably going to take home and probably apply to our programs. My friend Christina has a question, and she's asking, what is a big don't when talking to tribes and communities about human trafficking? Besides the don't, what are a couple of do's? Again, what are the do's and don'ts when talking to a tribal community about human trafficking? How about Denise?
I think on that question, I think providing just that safe space to talk about it is a big do. we don't want to be in a threatening place or somewhere that someone's gonna not want to talk. Because, you know, having the conversation or people disclosing anything can be really traumatizing. So that's one thing that we definitely want to have when we have those conversations.
Thank you. Bonnie and Kayla, I'm going to also ask for your input. Let's start with Bonnie.
Yeah, I think just being honest about it, right? You know, everyone has different levels of information based on their, you know, where they are with their own knowledge, how much work they've done, how much, you know, trainings they've taken, how much work they've done with victim survivors and so forth. So I think it really varies. I think it's just being honest, not appearing like you have all the answers, but also just being honest about, you know, if you don't know something, then ask that, you know, you'll find out, you'll have to help that person with more information and so forth. What we don't want to do is, you know, close the door at any point. Being able to keep that door open for good, honest communication, I think is really the biggest do, right? Because, you know, every community is different. So there's communities who've done a lot of work on this issue and some that haven't even begun to address it. So it's going to vary everywhere.
Thank you, Bonnie. Kayla, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, for dues, just to kind of piggyback off Bonnie, it's really important that we are being honest in our terminology and words. And I know when I first started maybe giving presentations about stuff like this, it was hard for me to call it what it was, you know, sex trafficking, the coercion, the rape that comes along with it, and using those words because they feel so harsh and just not good to say. And then you feel like you're making people uncomfortable. But the point isn't to make people feel comfortable. Our point also isn't to scare people. So I think a big don't is like using dark imagery when we're producing flyers or social media posts and other things like that to kind of like get an emotional reaction. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for just factual information with those hard words without it being, you know, this gut punch of things that are going to make you scared or like worried to leave the house, or, you know, you watch these movies like Taken and things like that. And that's not typically how human trafficking is. So I think a big don't is kind of offering that education to split the perception of what maybe the media or TV has shown us on what human trafficking is versus what it really is. And that's another reason people aren't always super comprehensive, that this is happening daily in our communities. This is happening to our children, our men, our women on a daily basis. And it almost doesn't even matter where you're living at this point. So offering the facts is a huge do.
Right. Thank you for that, Kayla. And again, it's reiterating the topic of our conversation. How do we bring of our talking circle? How do we bring those conversations into our communities, into our homes? It's not comfortable, but it shouldn't be uncomfortable as well, because, you know, education is prevention. You mentioned a little bit about flyers, and I think you set the foundation for this next question. Michelle is asking, when we're doing outreach in our communities, what would be appropriate to put on a flyer? I'm assuming concerning human trafficking. So you talked a little bit about those two. Denise and Bonnie, do you have some tips of advice for if we're gonna do outreach and we're gonna make a flyer? What should we put on the flyer? What would be appropriate language?
I wanted to kind of say with the last question too, that confidentiality is really big. And I think having, you know, a confidentiality type of disclaimer on your flyer is going to help, you know, because when you're having community conversations, you know, somebody may tell you something and you don't want to go out and, you know, say that around in the community, because that may be something that they feel was private. And you want to, you know, make sure that you have some kind of confidential, privacy standard, I guess, when putting out any flyers or even having a meeting.
It's a very good point, Denise. I mean, we are a talking circle, but our talking circle is for, it's good medicine, right? We're gaining resources, sharing information. It's not about getting gossip, right? This is all good medicine. I am going to move on to the next question. Lupe is asking, what would be appropriate to bring as an offering or gift to an initial meeting? If so, what would that be? Lupe, I'm thinking that's a meeting with the tribe. I'm sorry, Lupe, could you elaborate? Would it be appropriate? The question is reading, would it be appropriate to bring an offering or gift to an initial meeting? If so, what would that be? Yes, okay, she said a tribal meeting. Thank you, Lupe, for participating again. So what I'm thinking, she's asking, like, if we were going to bring this conversation to tribal council or to a tribal meeting, a community event, and there's that first meeting to talk about, you know, I guess maybe putting it on the agenda or putting it on the table for discussion. Should outside agencies bring a gift? Have you guys ever experienced any of that?
I think when meeting with, with a tribal government, certainly maybe beginning the meeting and ceremony, with maybe passing tobacco and smudging, I think is appropriate. But I've never seen where gifts are brought, at least for a meeting like that, an introductory meeting. Maybe at a different type of meeting that might be more appropriate.
Thank you.
That's from what I've seen.
Thank you for that. Kayla or Bonnie, you want to, do you have some insight to that question?
I always suggest to any group that are really trying to educate their community and bring community together around an issue is to involve elders, and I've seen it happen over in Rosebud where our relative Tilly Black Bear would go out and have one of her staff go out and bring elders in, and the elders would be present and wouldn't even necessarily say anything, but they were there to sort of witness what was happening. At the same time, they were taking in information, and some of those elders became really strong voices for whatever the issue was that was being addressed, and even sort of ambassadors of the issue of the problem of that agency or that organization, and even talk on behalf of that organization and what they're trying to accomplish to tribal leadership, for example. So even bringing in elders, then of course if you bring them in, it's nice to provide them with offerings, with gifts, and I always say, well, pre-COVID I'd say food, but other than that, to really honor them in some way, because even if they don't say anything, just their presence I think can add a lot of validity and strength to any gathering.
Thank you, Bonnie. Those are very good points. We have a comment from Rita also suggesting follow the protocols of the local tribe that you are serving or those that you want to make contact with, and perhaps maybe finding a local point of contact within that tribe to learn a little bit more about the community and their protocols and their customs. Thank you, Rita, for that insight. I am going through the list and I'm making sure I didn't miss anything. Okay, I do have one other question. Thank you from my friend Tracy. How does trauma-informed care differ specifically for Native survivors? Again, how does trauma-informed care differ specifically for Native survivors? Bonnie, I'll go to you for this question.
Our trauma is, in our genes, basically. And You know, we carry, just like some of the quotes at the beginning that were provided, you know, we carry a lot of the trauma that our ancestors experienced. So healing for us is healing our people, healing our ancestors, our societies that we come from, our clans that we come from. So, you know, where it's not just individual healing, but we're looking at collective healing when we participate in ceremony, when we have, so the more that's provided to help someone heal, I think is really important within an organization. And that would mean whatever is appropriate to that tribe, whether it's smudging, whether it's sage, whether it's other kinds of medicine, whether it's access and referrals to, you know, appropriate spiritual leaders, spiritual people in the community. You know, all of those kind of resources are important. But I also think that it's important to do your research, right? Not all spiritual leaders are safe. I did a conference for about 5 years on sexual exploitation perpetrated by Native spiritual leaders. And the topic sort of came out of the closet that, yes, we have people who are really highly regarded who still, you know, can misuse their power in that way. So again, be careful of who you refer your victim survivors to for healing.
Thank you, Bonnie. Yes, it's very important. Research is very important. Get to know the tribe you're working with, but also the context you're using. Make sure they're legitimate. This last question, I'm going to ask all of you to participate. So Denise, Kayla, and Bonnie. Kayla, I'm going to start with you again. Like all of you to contribute. It's going to be our last question. Jackie is asking, is there a screening tool for advocacy as it is more direct, meaning the advocate and the victim survivor knows what the advocate is helping them with? Again, is there a screening tool for advocacy, or is it more direct between the advocate and the victim survivor helping them? That's kind of.
I think maybe I have a concept of what she's asking. So we do have a human trafficking screening tool that we use with our clients, but within our practice, we don't ask people if they've been trafficked. It's just as a lot of things, like you don't ever tell someone like you're a victim or you've been sexually assaulted. That's kind of something that we have to allow people to come to their own terms with. So we have a screening tool. In my experience, we're not telling them, hey, I'm going to screen you for human trafficking. It's more, we're picking up on the cues or the potential signs, and we're kind of going through it with our intake process of, hey, like I just have some screening tools and I'm going to go through them with you and answer the questions however you feel best. So it's definitely not a direct thing, at least not within my agency, where we're saying, hey, we're going to screen you for human trafficking. And then that will give us a better insight. And then after we go through our screening tool on our own, maybe after we've had our first intake, we can work on a case plan on how to get more information from them and go forward with services and a case plan that's going to be effective for them.
Thank you for that answer, Kayla. Denise and Bonnie, Kayla actually took care of you. She's our friend, so I'm not going to ask you to add to that. And if there are additional things you want to add, we'll put that to the summary document. So thank you, Kayla, for wrapping us up there. I think it was a pretty good session. What about you? You guys feel good? I made some great friends here on this panel. I think these are phenomenal women doing good work. This has been a very informational conversation. I hope you feel the same. Our panelists are, again, very resourceful. We identified them to bring meaningful content to our conversations. We thank you for the work that you do. We hope that you continue to be safe. Again, our conversation was geared towards human trafficking conversations. How do we begin those conversations in tribal communities? And I hope the panelists offered some insight for starting a human trafficking conversation in your tribal community or other tribal communities that you serve. Do you see that nice poll question? I'm going to ask you to complete that for me. Please take a moment to respond to the poll. Again, as a reminder, we have opportunities for you to apply for non-competitive TVSSA funding to support victims of crime, including services for victims of victims of human trafficking. The Office for Victims of Crime releases the TVSSA funding solicitation around the beginning of the year. To be notified of the solicitation for applications, subscribe to OVC News. OVC will also share news about OVC programs, initiatives, and other funding opportunities. This link is in the chat. Remember, I said the chat is our friend today. We have all our resources there. All eligible applicants will include federally recognized tribes, tribal designees, and tribal consortiums will receive funding based on their population size. Please contact the Human Trafficking Capacity Building Center to learn more about TVSSA or request assistance with victim service program planning. The center's contact information is also in the chat. We will be following up with each of you through email, attaching relevant resources, a Q&A summary document, and a recording of this discussion. So if you think you missed something along the way and you're taking notes, you can refer back to the link that we send you to review and see everybody's happy smiles again. My sisters, thank you for joining us. Bonnie, Denise, and Kayla, we appreciate your time. And again, please be well and be safe. Denise, don't leave just yet. Everyone, to end our conversation in a good way, as you recall, John opened with a prayer for us. We're going to ask Denise to say closing prayer for our time here. Go ahead, Denise.
Actually, I didn't do a prayer this time. I'm going to read a poem that I just ran into that I don't know who wrote this, but I thought it was fitting for what we do. And I don't think there's even a title. I didn't see a title. So the best way to keep horrible acts a secret is to convince the world that they are simply history, that the humans guilty of such crimes are of a different breed, them versus us cultured ones. But one day we will break free. And in captions, it says all secrets come out eventually. And I found that very powerful. So thank you everybody for coming, and have a beautiful day.
Thank you, Denise, for sharing that poetry. It was beautiful and relevant to our conversation. Well, folks, that is the end of our time and our visit. Thank you for joining us on our Talking Circle. Again, it was a beautiful day to meet friends, to talk about this important topic. We appreciate your time, and we look forward to seeing you in our future Talking Circles. Have a good day. Bye.